Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast, episode 115.
Honest citizens like you protect themselves every day. We talk about it every week on the Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast. Were these gun owners lucky, or did they have a plan? How should we defend the people we love? We discuss recent examples on the Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast. Put us in your pocket.
Welcome to the Out of Order Podcast, your window into the firearms community, exploring those shaping the future of our rights and protecting our lifestyle, laws, legal cases, activism, and self-defense in a candid and honest podcast for our brothers and sisters in arms. Here's your host, James Kalita.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 115 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Show notes page for today's episode is outoforderjameskalita.com/115. Today's sponsors are Scott Shot. Whether you are taking a class as a complete beginner or an experienced, highly competent shooter seeking an NRA instructor certification, Scott Shot classes are comfortable, friendly, and taught with a high instructor-to-student ratio. And by Self-Defense Gun Stories Podcast, weekly reports and commentary on civilian self-defense. So be sure to check out our sponsors. If you head over to the show notes page, outoforderjameskalita.com/115, you'll find links to those sites. And we're going to be taking about a 2-week break after this episode. I'm starting a new schedule, and this is my last pre-recorded episode, so I need to figure out when I'm going to record these and give my guests enough time to pick some times and make some appointments and record some episodes. So in the meantime, if you have any ideas for episode guests, send me an interview, jameskalita@gmail.com, or head over to the Facebook page, send me a message. And today's guest is Jacob Rieper.
Jacob Rieper, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, James.
Oh, my pleasure. So, Jacob, you blog at gunpoliticsnewyork.com. Would you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I've been involved with gun rights in New York State since the early 90s, and I currently blog it. I have my own blog, gunpoliticsny.com, and I report basically on, it's all politics and legislation. It's not stuff like competitive shooting or like really industry reviews or anything like that, and it's all the politics of gun ownership and legislation surrounding that in New York State.
Gotcha. So you've been doing this since the 90s. You've sort of observed this this trend from you guys had an assault weapons ban, but it was, from what I understand, you could own a lot of things. They just had to be made before, was it 94?
Well, originally, yes. When the federal assault weapons ban came down in Congress, that had the grandfather clause in it. In 2000, then Governor Pataki instituted his 5-point plan that basically made the federal law permanent. What Governor Cuomo did 5 years ago is his so-called SAFE Act, which redefines an assault weapon from basically 2 features down to 1 feature. He required registration, or you get rid of the gun. That has not gone over well. The media reports that I've seen, because most of the mainstream media will not report it, it's only a tiny percentage of the number of people who have them have bothered to register it. But with the legislature has come back in session, they are looking to expand upon that. I don't think they are going to do more specifically like assault weapons type stuff, but there is more legislation that they're likely to take up within the next few weeks.
Gotcha. What do they have proposed?
Well, Governor Cuomo said he wants 3 specific things. The first is this extreme risk protection order. This is something that has been floating around at the national level for the last couple of years, and basically it would let anyone basically complain to the police. They say something to the effect, they think this person is a danger, and they can have the guns confiscated until it goes through a procedure to basically show that you're not a danger to it. The second thing, he wants to ban bump stocks, although I believe there's some question as to whether they're actually really legal now in New York State. And the third one, he wants to extend the NICS check that, as it stands now, if it doesn't clear within like 3 days, the sale can automatically proceed. He wants to extend that to 10 days. This is the proposals that Cuomo said he wants. However, based upon previous years, it's probably going to be a bunch more bills than that, including some form of mandatory storage where you have to keep the gun locked up if it's not in use, some form of dealer liability, record keeping. They call it child-proof guns. Basically, the guns have to have a trigger pull, a really heavy trigger pull, micro-stamping. It has to put a unique code on every spent shell in at least 2 places, and possibly more. Things have changed this session. In previous years, it was the lower house, the state assembly, was dominated by the Democrats, and the upper chamber, the state senate, had a Republican majority, which didn't let most of this stuff come up. However, in the past election, the Democrats just destroyed the Republican Party in the state, and now they have solid majorities in both houses, and they clearly are going to take advantage of that. The session just started, and they pushed through this thing called GENDA. It relates to discrimination against gays, transgender people. I just saw my Twitter feed. They are going to take up something related to teacher evaluations, as basically this is something that the teachers union wants. And there's a whole laundry list of, quote, progressive type items that now that the Democrats have total control of New York State government, they're all the stuff that has been pent up over the last 5, 10, however many years, they're going to send a lot of this stuff sailing through. So even though Cuomo has said he just wants 3 items, he's probably going to get a whole bunch more.
Right. And for people outside, the tri-state area, a lot of times people think, well, you guys, you're gun owners and you voted for this, but is New York like a lot of other states where the majority of the state is conservative and right-leaning, but it's dominated by like Manhattan and other cities?
Well, that is true. The New York City does make up roughly 40% of the registered voters, and if you take in the surrounding area, it's probably just under 50%. What would be like from the Hudson Valley north through Albany and out towards western New York probably makes up like 50-something%. But in terms of voter registration, nearly 20 years ago when Pataki passed his gun control bill, Democrats outnumbered Republicans about 3-2. The Democrats now outnumber the Republicans about 2.25 to 1. And yeah, the Republicans, the party, it's been widely, the blame has been put on Governor Pataki that when he was in charge, he really didn't do any effort to build up, like the next generation of Republican leaders. So once he left, basically you just had a bunch of old people who were there, and they didn't do anything in terms of party building, getting the next generation of leaders to move up the food chain to take their place in elected office. And it got to the point where the last election, like I said, the Democrats absolutely destroyed the party. There is no leadership. There is no agenda coming from what's left of the Republicans, and the Democrats are basically going to do as they please. But yes, it is the state is largely dominated by New York City, but the gun control issue it's not as big of a deal as you would think for the New York City area officials. Yes, that the ones who tend to bring up the bills live in and around the New York City, the metro area, But the majority of the politicians there, they don't really care about it. It's not their issue. It's not something that comes up, like in their campaign literature. And they tend to go along with whatever that basically the party leadership says. So if the governor says he wants this, or one of the legislative leaders says he wants this for whatever reason, they will simply just vote in lockstep. Because if you ever watch the legislature in session, and it's broadcast online, there's not any real debate on the issues like you would see, say, in Congress. It's all political theater. You will have the bill sponsor will come up. He will say something to the effect, this is my legislation. This is the greatest thing, and we have to have it. You will have a couple of the Republicans will stand up. They will recite their same script and, say, no, this is terrible. Then it's all largely a farce. And it got to the point where they would do this about every year. And one of the assemblyman from Nassau County, he had to have had all what he was going to say written out someplace, because he was literally bringing up the same talking points every single year. And he'd just say, this is the 12th year I brought this up, this is the 13th year, and just blah, blah, blah. And it's all a bunch of political theater. And the vast majority of the legislators that are there, they don't read the bills, they just vote the way the party tells them to. And this has been going on for, since the founding of the Republic. And that's what we have to deal with. And I think a lot of people from other states, because I have talked with people from other groups, and they don't understand that it's not a matter of being right, that there's not discussions of the issues. It's all about how money is spent and where it flows to the various political entities, and that's how they make their decisions. They don't make decisions basically on the facts.
So what I remember, well, a lot of gun owners tend to think that the answer is the Supreme Court. And I think you guys had a magazine ban or size restriction go to the Supreme Court. And so even after that, how'd that turn out?
Well, yes, the restriction, and nothing actually made it up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, that case that was challenging the SAFE Act didn't go to the Supreme Court because at the time Scalia died, and the case was withdrawn from consideration because it would have probably ended up with a 4-4 tie, which basically just reinforces the lower court. And what the Second Circuit Court basically threw out was the requirement that you can only have 7 rounds in a 10-round magazine. And the issue did come up in the western New York part of the state where I believe it was in Erie County. The district attorney said he's not going to prosecute this anymore, and a bunch of the other district attorneys from that area have followed suit. And they were basically, I don't think they knew that this had gone through the court case, that they couldn't prosecute on that. But basically the requirement that you could only have 7 rounds in the 10-round magazine was thrown out.
Gotcha. Okay. Wow. And you wrote something else that I thought was interesting, that that even if it goes to the Supreme Court and we win, they're just going to make some subtle changes and put it back through, which is pretty much what's been happening, because we have Heller, we have McDonald, and that should really be the end of it, but we're still repetitioning the Supreme Court over and over and over again. So, what are your thoughts there?
Well, that's right. That's basically what they've done in the Chicago area, and that's absolutely what they'll do in New York. People don't understand that the reason we have gun control in New York, it's not so much that there is a strong ideology for it. You will have a lot of these guys, they don't understand the issue. It sounds good to them, and they go along with, like I said, what the party leaders want. And the party leaders make decisions based entirely upon who puts money into this system. And they're very open with saying that. I had an elected official tell me point blank that he can't do what I want him to do because he has to take all his bills to this was in the assembly majority leader, and Sheldon Silver, he was the guy in charge at the time, would not let any bills through unless it could be shown that Democrats, meaning his conference, get something for it. And basically, I have to get involved with Democrat politics. And he told me this, and I thought, it's not that way. I mean, it just couldn't be that way. Well, about a year or so after that happened, I did help a person get elected to the state legislature who was a Democrat, and she legitimately had an interest in guns. And 2 weeks after that is when I started getting the phone calls from the Assembly Speaker's office. And about a year after that, it was made clear to me that any legislative notices I sent out was also being circulated by the Senate Democrat Conference. And this is something that the NRA has never gotten close to having anything like that for them, and the same with the National Shooting Sports Foundation or some of these other smaller groups. And the reason is simply because I acknowledged the Democrats, something that no one else wants to do. And I tell this story to people, and they don't believe it. They will go on about, basically right and wrong. They will quote stuff from the Constitution. And yes, on technical merit, they're right. But the fact that Albany operates this way and has been operating this way since for literally a couple hundred years, that doesn't change the fact that they have to deal with it. Right. That this, you have to do these things. So what I told a whole bunch of people beforehand, before the last election cycle, that, if you want to hurt Cuomo, you have to tell people to go out, the gun owners, to go out and vote for Cynthia Nixon in the Democrat primary, the actress. And she was clearly not our friend, but the only way to damage Cuomo, the only thing he cares about is, who's involved with their elections. Well, no one from the NRA down did that, so Cuomo does not care about them. And it's literally that simple. It's not so much an issue of right or wrong or even ideology. It's, are you involved with the party and the system? If you are, they care about you. If you're not, they don't care. And that's it.
And so we had something similar in New Jersey for, I guess it was about 20 years, where the Senate president was a Democrat, and he had promised that he was never going to let any gun control laws, into the assembly. And his motivation was that he was from the southern part of the state, and there was a lot of union votes down there, and union guys tend to be Republican but vote Democratic because they want the unions. Yeah. So that worked until Sandy Hook. And Sandy Hook came along, and then he changed his mind, and we ended up with 27 new gun control laws in the assembly. So how do you keep it from backfiring?
Well, what I have told people is you absolutely, because in years past, literally the Democrats have been totally ignored in the legislature since the last person that I know other than me who tried to have any sort of relationship with them was the NRA lobbyist who, and I can't remember his name now, but he wrote that book, Ricochet, the life of a gun lobbyist, back in the late 80s, early 90s. And after that, it's pretty much just run right to the Republicans, and, basically say, this is our position, and back us, and just totally ignore the Democrats. So that needs to stop. What people have to do is they have to get involved with Democrat politics, meaning you have to go to their events. They're either at the local, your local town. They will have oftentimes either meetings or fundraisers or some sort of gathering. People have to go to that, either as individuals, representatives of local gun clubs, or representative of the various sportsman gun interests. They have to be involved in that. As I said, back with the primaries, there has to be candidate ratings for Democrat primaries in and around the New York City area. That's where most of the action takes place, in the primaries, not the general election. That's how that woman, Ocasio-Cortez, got elected. Turnout was like 12% or something, and the incumbent just did nothing, assuming he would win, and he didn't. So there has to be ratings sent out to gun owners during the Democrat primaries. there has to be funding of like Democrat events. There's coming up sometime next month, the annual Black and Puerto Rican Caucus. They have a 3-day weekend of basically politicking and stuff, and telling their interest groups what to do. I have said the NRA should sponsor that, send someone up there to do, put on like maybe a seminar or something, highlighting what goes on, what they do, that it's not just a upstate Republican white boy type of thing, that gun ownership affects everyone, including down in the New York City area. So it's basically stuff like that. Arguing with them, that's not really going to work. Just basically saying, the courts are going to do something. No, there has to be the one-on-one type of engagement. The political stuff that has gone on solely for the Republicans has to involve the Democrats from now on.
And how was you talked about the one representative that you helped get elected. How has reception been on the left when you talk to people one-on-one and about gun rights? How does that go?
They don't really, the ones from New York City don't know what you're talking about, okay? They don't have an understanding of guns, because most of them, it's not an issue. Well, two things. First, they don't have the personal, they don't know, they have not shot before. They don't know how, guns function, okay? So you have that one thing. The second, if you look at the Democrat Party from the city area over a period of time, you can tell which issues are the most important by who talks about the stuff. And they're mostly involved with like union stuff and government spending. Then you get to like the second tier of interests, like the environmentalists, like abortion, groups that like have a constituency and spend money basically telling, their supporters who to vote for. So you'll see a lot of that. When you get to what's left after that, the gun control groups, as I said, there are a few from that area who like to talk about the issue, but the bulk of them, it's not of interest to them. And they, like I said, they just vote for the party. That gun issue, their constituents don't bring it up. They don't know enough about it personally. If a gun control bill comes up and it sounds good, like the risk protection order, they're not going to think it through. But there's no inherent problem talking with these guys. I have done that before. I went in to speak with an assemblyman from Queens. I thanked him for the way he voted, and I asked him, has he ever, done any shooting? Does he know anything about guns? And he said no. He said he had some of his constituents. They called him up and they explained to him, this was on the micro-stamping bill. He told them, he was explaining, this is why it's not going to work. And it's like, oh, okay. And he just went with their recommendation. So talking with someone from the left, that's not an inherent problem. There are some that are just off the deep end, but the vast majority of them, there's no inherent problem, calling someone up, say if you wanted to interview someone who's like one of the sponsors of gun control legislation, there's no problem doing that. They're all polite. I've never had any negative, feedback from doing that.
So what can folks listening around the country, how can they help you?
Well, if you don't live in New York, you really can't directly help us. If you want, you're looking to donate money for legal cases, the NRA Legal Defense Fund, there will probably be a few challenges coming up that may indirectly affect New York. I'm sure there's going to be a carry case, either the one in California or somewhere else, that if that goes up to the Supreme Court, that could indirectly affect New York, because then it would start, let's say May issue is ruled unconstitutional in California. Well, then New York, New Jersey, and all the other states that have it, there would be lawsuits starting with that. So people who say who don't live in New York, they want to help us, give money to the NRA Legal Defense Fund.
Okay. And I always ask my guests to recommend books I think every gun owner should read, whether they're about guns or politics or any come to mind.
Yeah, there's actually a book. It's called Confrontational Politics. It's written by the guy who founded Gun Owners of America. He was a state senator in California. He actually wrote 2 books, and they're basically the same. One is What Makes You Think We Read the Bills, and the other is Confrontational Politics. And it basically describes how people, quote, on the right, or how you would call gun owners, should get involved with things. And a simple way to describe what this thing says is, if you have a politician who's, they're not voting your way, don't go up and argue with them. If you want to get their attention, figure out how to raise money for their opponent. Because stuff like that always gets their attention. Arguing with them, getting in their face, stuff like that doesn't work. And his books, they're so accurate that it's scary, particularly the one about what makes you think we read the bills. What he's describing goes on in New York, New Jersey, and a few of these other states where that are known for big government, corruption, and incompetence. And and they're not long books either. It's like 100-something pages, but they are the best political books I've ever seen.
All right, and I'll put links up to gunpoliticsnewyork.com. Any other links I should put on the show notes page?
Put up book links to those books. They're off the Gun Owners of America website. They're somewhere in the store, but they are if you read one of those books, you will absolutely understand why things go on in Albany and New York City and how to fight them.
Well, Jacob, I thank you very much for being on the show. Any parting words for our listeners?
Don't give up on places like New York and New Jersey. They are not. People like to say that these places are too far gone. They're not. It requires a better understanding of politics to be successful here, but we absolutely can have positive change in New York.
Thanks again for tuning in to episode 115 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Show notes page for today's episode, outoforderjameskalita.com/115. Please head over to the show notes page, check out the links to our sponsors, Scott Shot at scottshot.com, and the Self-Defense Gun Stories Podcast. This is Out of Order James Kalita. I'll see you in a few weeks.